Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Magic the Conversation, where we go over various expansion sets from Magic the Gathering's history. Today, we will be going over the second expansion to the game, Antiquities. Antiquities came out March 1994. This is where Magic was starting to learn how to crawl. Hey, Butter. Welcome in. No problem. I appreciate you being here. This is also a good way to I just like talking about Magic. It was a big part of my teenage, got me through high school, and I made some friends that I still talk to this day just through the game alone. So, and I just have always wanted to make videos about it, so that's why we're here today. So the Antiquities set from Magic, it is dominantly about artifacts. Artifacts you can put in any deck. They most artifacts, at least back in the day, they've changed. They've added colored artifacts later on, but all the old school ones, like these ones with the brown background, black border, not border, card facing, you can put in any deck. So you can just spend 2 mana of any color to play this Amulet of Krug, and you can fit it in any deck. So that was one cool thing about artifacts. Like, they were versatile in a lot of decks. Butter, what happened to Matt Pat? As far as the story for the Antiquities set, I know in Alpha/Beta Revised, there was mention of Urza. Urza would end up being one of the most popular and somewhat powerful characters as the Magic universe would unfold. Urza and his brother Mishra were excavating artifacts on the continent of Terracer, which is part of Dominaria. And they would stumble upon a cave known as the Cave of Koilos. In the Cave of Koilos, they would find an artifact, and the brothers would end up fighting over it. And the fight caused the artifact to split into two. Each brother would get one half of the artifact, which would end up being the Might Stone and the Meek Stone. Urza got the Might Stone, Mishra got the Meek Stone. And then the brothers would continue to fight, which would end up creating a war known as the Brothers' War. The Brothers' War would go on to be described and retold in many sets in the future. In addition, all this artifacts that they were excavating came from the Thrawn. The Thrawn was an ancient empire that was very versed in technology. However, there was an evil part of the Thrawn from Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth ended up becoming a Phyrexian, and the Phyrexians were one of Magic's first villains, so to speak. They view flesh as weak, and it was their whole point of existence was to convert all life into a machine, or sort of techno-organic machine. Mishra would end up joining the Phyrexians in hopes to overpower his brother in the war, but Urza would end up winning, but at a great cost. Urza would make a powerful artifact known as the Silix, and the Silix ended up destroying a lot of life on the plane of Dominaria, and it would end up creating an ice age, which will all be explained in future sets. So we'll go over the cards, and anytime any of the cards mention any of the characters, it'll be read in the flavor text. So starting with the Amulet of Krug, 2 mana, tap it to prevent 1 damage to any target. Among the first allies Urza gained were the people of Krug. As a sign of friendship, Urza gave the healers of the city potent amulets. Afterwards, thousands journeyed to Krug in hopes of healing, greatly adding to the city's glory. I did have this card, and I used it, but I never got good usage out of it, really. Preventing 1 damage, it protects your small creatures from dying, but it's not all that good. If you didn't have to tap it, it would be a lot better. Next up, we have an Argivian Archaeologist. He's got glasses, which is funny. He looks very primitive, but he's got very modern-looking glasses. This is probably the first character from the Magic the Gathering set with glasses. I don't think I've ever seen this card before, so that is funny. He costs 3. He's a 1/1. You can pay 2 white and tap him to bring 1 artifact from your graveyard back to your hand. That's really good. There are a lot of powerful artifacts in the game today. Fascinated by the lore of ancient struggles, the archaeologist searches incessantly for remnants of an earlier, more powerful era. He has little, this is primitive cave drawings on stone. Argivian Blacksmith. 3 mana, 2/2. Tap to prevent up to 2 damage to target artifact creature. So he would be good if your deck had a lot of artifact creatures. Through the years of study and training, the Blacksmith of Argive became adept at reassembling the mangled remains of strange mechanical creatures abounding in their native land. That would be referring to the Phyrexians. Argothian Pixies. Green. We don't really see green fairies in Magic anymore. It's mostly fairies are black and or blue. There are 2/1. They cannot be blocked by artifact creatures. Any damage that Argothian Pixies take from artifact creatures is reduced to 0. Now they don't have flying, which is interesting. Oh, I'm surprised this card hasn't been canceled due to the flavor text, but I'm going to go ahead and read it anyway. After the rape of Argoth Forest during the rule of the Artificers, the Pixies of Argoth bent their magic to more practical ends. So there was a forest nearby that both brothers had ended up tearing down. All the wood, all the land was just destroyed in the war, just because when war happens, both sides need to produce weapons, and in order to produce weapons, they need resources, and wood was, they really needed wood. That's what they meant by the rape of the Argoth Forest. This is probably the only card that has that word in it. I have never seen any card with that word. So, interesting. Argothian Treefolk. This artwork is very crude looking. 5 mana, 3/5. Any damage Argothian Treefolk takes from an artifact source is reduced to 0. Haunting cries we hear in our dreams as the forest dies a death from machines. Now, I like the flavor text. It's probably the only thing I like about this card. It's kind of got Fern Gully vibes. The Armageddon Clock. 6 mana. Put 1 counter on Armageddon Clock during each of your upkeeps. At the end of your upkeep, each player takes damage equal to the number of counters on the clock. Any player may spend 4 colorless mana during their upkeep to remove a counter. Pretty much the upkeep is the beginning of your turn when all of your anything that is tapped becomes untapped and you can use it again. Interesting card. But once your opponent stabilizes with mana, they will be able to stop the clock, so to speak. Artifact Blast. For 1 red, counter any artifact. did not know this card existed, this card would definitely, I mean, the opponent would, this could counter Black Lotus, but the only way it would counter Black Lotus is if Black Lotus was played on the first turn, the caster of Artifact Blast would have already had to have a mountain or a red source out on the battlefield. Artifact Possession. Looks like there's this small demon taking control of this sword. 3 mana. Does 2 damage to target artifact's controller each time the artifact is tapped or its activated ability is paid. Any black mage could coax a Thraxodemon to inhabit a magical artifact. Thraxodemons are Phyrexians. They have control over artifacts. Artifact Ward, 1 white. Enchanted creature cannot be blocked by artifact creatures. Any damage taken from an artifact source is reduced to 0. It's like essentially protection from artifacts. Because like I said before, the Antiquities set, this is Artifacts Matter. The set's littered with artifacts. Ashnod's Altar. 3 mana. For free, you can sacrifice any one of your creatures to add 2 colors mana to your mana pool. I used this card extensively. I did have a lot of decks where I needed my creatures to be sacrificed, and this was a good way to sacrifice them, because you can't just sacrifice your creature for no reason. You have to have a card that says sacrifice a creature in order to put them in the graveyard if they're out on the battlefield. My combo that I used with Ashnod's Altar was with Sliver Queen. Sliver Queen would come much, much later in Magic, but it was a 5 mana 7/7, and you can pay 2 colors mana to put a Sliver token out. So if I would pay the 2 colors mana, put a Sliver token out, I can sacrifice the Sliver token to get 2 colors mana back, and then I use that for another Sliver. Now, by itself, I won't really be doing anything except making infinite Sliver tokens. There are enchantments that say when a creature enters the battlefield, deal 1 damage to the opponent. That would be a win condition. I would just make infinite slivers, or until all my opponents are dead. They would take 1 damage for each sliver I cast and sacrifice, and so forth. There's another artifact called Hearthstone, which reduced the mana cost of your activated abilities on your cards by 1 mana. So that would make the Sliver Queen able to only need 1 mana to make a Sliver token. At that point, I can make infinite slivers that stay out, because I would sacrifice 1, it would give me 2 colorless mana, and then I can make 2 slivers with the 2 mana, sacrifice 1, and keep repeating until I had an infinite number of slivers on the battlefield. So currently, Ashnod's Altar is my favorite card from the set. Ashnod's Battle Gear. Tap to give a creature you control +2/+2 for as long as Ashnod's Battle Gear remains tapped. You may choose not to untap it during your untap step. This horrid invention clearly illustrates why Mishra's lieutenant was feared as much by her troops as by her foes. Ashnod was also a Phyrexian, I believe. You would see that she does a lot of experiments later on in future sets. Ashnod's Transmogrant. I like the artwork on this card. It has Resident Evil vibes. Something being experimented on, or its life force taken away. Ashnod found few willing to trade their humanity for the power she offered them. You can tap it to give target non-artifact creature +1/+1, and is now considered an artifact creature. So you make one of your regular creatures an artifact creature. Pretty cool. It was a way around protection. I did own the card at one point, but I don't remember if I used it in any decks, and I don't recall if I still own it or not. A Tog. 2 mana, 1/2. For free, you can sacrifice an artifact to give him +2/+2 until end of turn. If you had a bunch of artifacts out, he can eat as many as you want. You didn't have to pay any mana to use this ability. And he got +2 attack and +2 toughness for each artifact that you sacrificed. A Tog could get pretty big, and he was one of Magic's iconic creatures back in the day. In the Odyssey set, they would make other species of Atogs that sacrificed different cards, but they all essentially had the same ability. A Tog would even get in a super powered Atog in the form of Megatog, as well as an Atog Lord called Atog. Basically, it's like a creature that just eats anything not organic. If Atogs were actually living creatures, they would definitely be really bad. Because they would eat buildings, they would eat power lines, like anything not made, anything inorganic, they would eat. I do have a Tog. I never really used them in any decks though. Battering Ram, 2 mana, 1/1, banding. Any wall that blocks by Battering Ram is destroyed. By the time Mishra was defeated, no mage was foolish enough to rely heavily on walls. So this is one card that we see that Mishra did lose the war. I did have Battering Ram, but I never really used banding, and a lot of people did not use walls. Bronze Tablet, 6 mana. This is a lot of text. Pay 4, tap it. Target any card your opponent has in play. Exile it and Bronze Tablet from the game. You become the owner of that card and your opponent becomes the owner of Bronze Tablet. Opponent can prevent this exchange by spending 10 life. Then the Bronze Tablet is sacrificed. Remove this card from the deck if you're not playing for ante. So you sacrifice your Bronze Tablet to steal any card your opponent has in play, and you keep ownership of it. Definitely not a friendly card to use if you want to take your opponent's best card. That's why ante wasn't popular and would soon be retired from the game altogether. Candelabra of Tawnos. 1 mana, you can pay X to untap X lands. Tawnos learned quickly from Urza that utter simplicity often led to wondrous yet subtle utility. So it probably wouldn't do that much back in the day, but the Candelabra, we would soon get lands that tap for more than just 1 mana. We have lands that tap for mana equal to the amount of artifacts you have through Tolarian Academy. Gaia's Cradle does the same with creatures. The Candelabra would make sure that you'd be able to almost get infinite mana from them. I think you actually could get infinite mana with those mentioned lands. As long as you meet the requirements per whatever the lands ask for. Circle of Protection artifacts, just like all the previous Circles of Protection from the first Magic set. You pay 2 mana and prevent all damage done to you from an artifact source. Definitely powerful in this artifact set. Sataniel Druid, 1/1. Sataniel Druid gets a +1/+1 counter each time the opponent casts an artifact. A lot of artifacts in the set, so Sataniel Druid would be a decent card against them. Driven mad by the fall of Argoth, the Sataniel Druids found peace only in battle. Yeah, they lost their forest as part of the war, so. Clay Statue, 4 mana, 3/1, 3 attack, 1 toughness or power, what have you. You can pay 2 mana to regenerate it. Tawnos won fame as Urza's greatest assistant. After he created these warriors, Urza ended his apprenticeship, promoting him directly to the rank of master. So in the war, Urza would, of course, have his assistant Tanos, and Ashnod would essentially be Mishra's assistant. But Ashnod, I think, already had more experience. And the Phyrexians would, they kind of tricked Mishra into promising him power at the cost of his humanity. And he was kind of manipulated into helping them invade Dominaria, which would be explained later on when the Phyrexians got more of a spotlight. Clockwork Avian, 5 mana. I believe this is now an artifact bird. Yes, it is. It enters the battlefield with 4+1 power counters. It's flying. When it attacks or blocks, it loses a counter. During the controller's upkeep, they may add a counter that was lost by paying 1 colorless mana. 5 mana for essentially a 4/4 flying that could get weaker and that you had to pay mana for. It would trade with Sarah Angel, and by trade I mean they would kill each other in combat as long as no other cards were involved. But if it was up against Mahamoti Jinns or Shivan Dragons, it would get annihilated. Next 20. Colossus of Sardia. 9 mana, 9/9 trample. Pretty big. The Colossus does not untap during your untap step. You must pay 9 colorless mana in order to untap it. From the Sardian Mountains wakes Ancient Doom, warrior born from a rocky womb. So if you cheated it out early somehow, some way, you would only be able to attack with it once, and then it would stay tapped if you could not afford the 9 mana to untap it. Unless you had other cards that say untap target artifact or creatures. There were cards like that. Twiddle was probably the most common one back in the day because it came from Alpha. Coral Helm, 3 mana, can pay 3 and discard a card at random. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. You cannot use this if you have no cards in your hand. Awfully risky to use. I don't think it's worth it. If it cost maybe 1, then it might be for a last-ditch effort. But the fact that you have to discard the card at random, unless all you have are lands or cards that you're willing to lose in your hand, I would say this is one of the worst cards in the set, not including the anti-ones. Crumble. I like the artwork. It looks almost modern. It looks like Powerline. This looks like a Powerline up here, but I think it used to be a catapult. For 1 green, destroy target artifact. The artifact may not regenerate. However, the artifact controller gains life equal to the casting cost of the artifact. The spirits of Argoth grant new life to those who repent the folly of enslaving their labors to devices. I wonder if this card would ever be reprinted, because it's not broken for just 1 green mana. Because, Swords to Plowshares was a good removal card for white. The opponent gained life equal to the creature's power, I think it was. So this was the green equivalent to take out artifacts. Green was probably the most powerful color in this set just because it was so hateful towards artifacts. Which makes sense because green was the Argoth forest that got destroyed because of the artifacts. So from a storyline aspect, I think it was perfectly executed. Cursed Rack. 4 mana. The opponent must discard down to 4 cards during his or her discard step. Because normally, if you have more than 7 cards in your hand, you have to discard down to 7 at the end of your turn. However, if the Cursed Rack is out in play, you have to discard down to 4. Ashnod invented several torture techniques that could make victims even miles away beg for mercy as if the end had come. Again, we have a Stuffy doll being ripped apart on the rack. Stuffy doll was also on the Black Vice card. Damping Field. 3 mana enchantment. This dagger looks very Super Nintendo-like. Players may not untap more than one artifact during each of their own untap steps. Eventually, mages learn to harness the power of natural damping fields and use it for their own ends. Another artifact hosing card for white. If the opponent's deck was artifact heavy, this was a good card to slow them down. Detonate. 1 red and X. Target any artifact. X is the casting cost of the artifact. The artifact is destroyed and detonate does X damage to its controller. The artifact cannot be regenerated. Another card that I think should see reprint. It probably has been reprinted in future sets, not counting the revised unlimited Chronicle sets, but like new artwork and everything. Not sure which artifact is blowing up. It might look like a scepter. Drafna's Restoration. This looks like a carnival on top of a castle. For 1 blue mana, take any number of artifacts of your choice from target player's graveyard and place them on top of that player's library in any order. A good artifact recovery card for blue. Drafna, founder of the College of Latnam, could create a working model from even the smallest remnants of a newly unearthed artifact. Dragon Engine. 3 mana, 1/3. You could pay 2 colorless mana to give it +1 power until end of turn, and you can use it multiple times as long as you had the mana. It's Magic's first artifact. I thought it was a dragon, but apparently it's a construct. It should be Dragon Construct. Those who believed the city of Krug would never fall to Mishra's forces severely underestimated the might of his war machines. So Mishra had ended up with the Phyrexian technology as well, building these dragon engines, and these were Mishra's best machines in battle that they used. Urza would invent some of his own, which would be shown in the cards in this set and future sets as well. But the Dragon Engine was Mishra's signature war machine on his side of the battlefield. I was going to say, when I first was talking about the set, I was going to say Dragon Engine I like better than Ashnod's Altar. As a creature, yes, because the Altar is not a creature. But as a card, I think I'm still going to stick with Ashnod's Altar being my favorite. Dwarven Weaponsmith. 2 mana, 1/1. You can tap him during your upkeep to add a permanent +1/+1 counter to any creature. Each time you use this ability, you must choose one of your artifacts in play and sacrifice it. This artifact cannot be one that is already being sacrificed from another source, and it cannot be regenerated. So pretty much you sacrifice an artifact to give one of your creatures +1/+1, a +1/+1 counter. Makes sense because the blacksmith is you're using an artifact to make one of your creatures stronger in battle. Oh, I gotta sneeze. Wait for it. Uh-oh. This card stopped it. Energy Flux. 3 mana. All artifacts in play now require an additional upkeep cost of 2 colorless mana in addition to any other upkeep costs they may have. For each cost not paid, the artifact must be sacrificed. Great card if the opponent is using other artifacts. They would end up having to pay 2 mana per artifact that they have in order to keep each one alive. This would definitely slow them down, and they would have to strategically choose which artifacts they want to keep, because most of the time this card would see play. I had it in my first blue deck. The opponent already had a lot of artifacts on the battlefield, and then they wouldn't be able to afford to keep everything out. And then they would usually spend almost all their mana trying to keep up paying with everything. And you can freely do whatever as they're struggling to maintain board. Felden's Cane. 1 mana. You tap it to reshuffle your graveyard into your library. You must remove Felden's Cane from the game once this ability has been used. Felden found the first of these canes frozen in the Ronum Glaciers. Gaia's Avenger, 3 mana. It's a 1/1 plus it has the stars. Stars would later become X's. The X's below are the number of artifacts the opponent has played. Another green card that basically says if you're using artifacts, this guy's going to be a powerhouse. After the destruction of Argoth, Gaia was willing to instill a portion of her own power into some of her more vengeful followers. I like the artwork. The tree's definitely pointing to something that it's going to attack. It's probably going to attack one of Urza's machines or Mishra's machines. I never owned the card, but I do like the artwork. I like the artwork better than Dragon Engine. I'm going to have to say Gaia's Avenger is my favorite card from the set so far. I do like it better than the Altar. Gate to Phyrexia, one of the first cards of Phyrexia. For 2 black mana enchantment, sacrifice one of your creatures during your upkeep to destroy any artifact. You may not sacrifice a creature that is already being sent to the graveyard. The warm rain of grease on my face immediately made it clear I had entered Phyrexia. From Jarsil, her diary. Black does not have a lot of cards that could outright destroy artifacts. So this one is a rarity to see, but you have to sacrifice one of your creatures, and you can only do it during your upkeep in order to do so. Good card, though, for today's standards. It being only 2 black to put on the battlefield is pretty good. You just have to have creatures to sacrifice if you want to destroy your opponent's artifacts. There are cards, as we saw with Ashnod's Transmogrant, you could use the Transmogrant to turn one of your opponent's creatures into an artifact creature, and then you'll be able to sacrifice any of your creatures to destroy their creature because it's an artifact now. There are a lot of other cards that turn creatures into artifacts. So if I had this card, I would definitely put it in a deck that turned everything into an artifact. I think Mycosynth Lattice is one of the earliest one that says all permanents in play are artifacts. Goblin Artisans. Well, the artwork on here is very modern because I didn't think they had these hard hats back in medieval times or in fantasy times. They got a modern clock. I don't know what they writ. It looks like this was written in blood. And this goblin's eating paste. Oh, here we have glasses again. Goblin must have good vision insurance to afford glasses. Let's see what they do. You may tap Goblin Artisans as you cast an artifact. Then flip a coin. The opponent calls heads or tails while the coin is in the air. If the flip ends up in the opponent's favor, your artifact spell is countered. Otherwise, you draw another card. You can only use this ability one time. You can only use this ability once for each time you cast an artifact. You have to tap the goblins in order to do that. I did not know that existed, but I don't think I'd ever run the card unless I had a coin flip deck, because there are cards in Magic's future where flipping coins matters. Krark's Thumb lets you flip 2 coins instead of 1, and then you get to choose which coin flip matters. And then there's another card, I forgot what it's called, Chance Encounter maybe, if my memory serves correct. Every time you flip a coin, if the flip ends up in your favor, it gets a counter. And I think when it has 10 or more counters, you win the game. Or something along those lines. We'll find out once I hit those sets in the future. Golgothian Silix. I think this is the Silix that ended up destroying the world and creating the Ice Age. All cards from the Antiquities expansion, including the Golgothian Silix, must be discarded from play. So just like in the Arabian Nights, the City in a Bottle, this is the Antiquities version. From the earliest educations, the brothers had known that no human contrivance could stand against the true masters of Dominia. Dominia would eventually become Dominaria. I'm not sure why it was changed. I don't know if Dominia already existed somewhere else. Not familiar with that. But I will, if I find out, I will let you all know in a future Magic stream. Grape Shot Catapult, 4 mana, 2/3. You can tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature with flying. For years, scholars debated whether they were Urza's or Mishra's creation. Recent researchers suggest that they were invented by the brothers' original master, Tokasia, and that both used these devices. Tokasia was Urza's and Mishra's master. She oversaw them while they were excavating, and she was unfortunately killed when the brothers were fighting over the stone, because when the stone was ripped apart, I do believe there was an explosion at the camp, and she was killed in the explosion. Haunting Wind, great artwork on the card. I love these skeletal specters. 4 mana, each time an artifact in play is tapped or its activated ability is paid, Haunting Wind deals 1 damage to that artifact's controller. It is not triggered by continuous artifacts. These devices lured so many spirits that sometimes entire battlefields would become haunted at once. Hercule's Recall, 2 mana. All artifacts in play are returned to their owner's hands. Any enchantments on those artifacts are sacrificed. Cannot be played during the damage dealing phase of so it cannot be played during combat. This spell, attributed to Drafna, was actually the work of his wife, Hercule. Definitely another artifact hosing card. And again, if you had a way to, if you have a card that makes everything in play an artifact, including lands, this would just totally wipe the whole battlefield. Every card would go into their owner's hands. Ivory Tower. I used this card a lot back in my day. During your upkeep, gain 1 life for each card in your hand over 4. If you played this on the first turn, you're definitely gaining a little bit of life each turn until your hand starts to run low by playing cards. If you have a way to keep drawing cards into your hand, then this card was definitely a lifesaver, as you would gain 3 life per turn, saying that you had a full hand. Valuing scholarship above all else, inhabitants of the Ivory Tower reward those who sacrifice power for knowledge. Jalum Tome. You can pay 2 mana and tap it to draw a card, but then you have to discard a card afterwards. This time-worn relic was responsible for many of Urza's victories, though he never fully comprehended its mystical runes. I guess this is where he found the blueprints for a lot of his inventions. Okay, we are halfway through. Martyrs of Corliss. I have never seen this card before. This guy's sword broke and this guy's egg shattered. 5 mana, 1/6. Unless Martyrs of Corliss is tapped, any damage done to you by artifacts is instead dealt to them. You may not take this damage yourself, though you may prevent it if it is possible. No more than one bodyguard of your choice can take damage for you in this mana each turn. So they were like a shield against artifacts. With the 6 toughness, they would be tough to kill with damage alone. Here's the Might Stone. This is what Urza got. All attacking creatures get +1 power. For 4 mana, while exploring the sacred cave of Koilos with his brother Mishra and their master Tokasia, Urza fell behind in the Hall of Tagsin, where he discovered the remarkable Might Stone. I think the Meek Stone was in Alpha or Beta. It was where I think creatures with power 3 or greater do not untap during their untap step. I thought both of these stones were in the set. Millstone. Pay 2 mana, and tap it to take the top 2 cards from target player's library and put them in their graveyard. More than one mage was driven insane by the sound of the millstone relentlessly grinding away. This card would see plenty of reprints, and it was an alternate win condition, although usually slower than dealing damage to your opponent, because, as the rules state in the game, if any player cannot draw a card because there are no more cards in that player's library, they lose the game. There are some cards that, of course, are the opposite, to where I think it's Laboratory Maniac. It says if you would lose the game from not being able to draw a card from your library, you win the game instead. But Millstone was one of the first cards of his kind that did this ability, which would later become keyword. Instead of saying target player takes top X cards off their deck into their graveyard, it would shorten it to actually say mill. And that's what mill meant. Thanks to the Millstone being one of the first cards to do what it did. Mishra's Factory. And I believe Mishra's Factory had 4 different artworks based on each season. You can tap it to get, it's a land, you tap it for 1 colorless mana, or you could pay 1 and it becomes a 2/2 artifact creature until end of turn. This was one of the first lands that would be able to be used as a creature. Magic would see many more in future sets to come. One powerful aspect about a land becoming a creature is, since lands cannot be countered, this was a good way for decks to get around counter spells and still being able to have attackers or blockers. Also, the Mishra's Factory could be put in any deck because it is a land. You don't need mana of a specific type to use it. However, it is not a basic land. The basic lands of Magic are plains, swamps, forests, islands, and mountains. If you don't have, you can only have up to 4 of the same non-basic land in your deck. So you could only have 4 Mishra's Factory, up to 4 Mishra's Factory. Cat's freaking out. Yep, here's a different artwork for Mishra's Factory. I don't know if this is a forest behind them or smoke. I think it's smoke. What's behind them here? I guess like a foggy haze. They got a balloon floating around. Oh, is that the mountain symbol on that balloon? What's this? Oh, it looks like a Christmas ornament. This might be the autumn version, or it's just a hot day. Oh yeah, here. Okay, so it was spring, summer, autumn, and this is the winter one. I like how they have Christmas lights on them. Even during war, Mishra and the Phyrexians thought to celebrate Christmas. Mishra's War Machine. I like these little mechanical skeletons are like all doing things. These guys are cranking the wheels. These guys are manning the cannons. I don't know what's to do with the constellations. This looks like more like a carnival than a war machine. 7 mana, 5/5 with banding. During your upkeep, discard one card of your choice from your hand, or the war machine becomes tapped and does 3 damage to you. Definitely a bad card. Not only does it cost 7, but the fact that you still have to discard a card at the beginning of your turn to use it, to stop it from dealing 3 damage to you, is too costly for a 5/5 creature with banding. I don't care even if it is an artifact. Mishra's Workshop. You can tap it to add 3 colorless mana to your mana pool. This can only be used to cast artifacts. Still a powerful card because a lot of artifacts to produce more mana other than the Black Lotus and the Power 9 Moxes. This was used to put out even more mana making artifacts, giving you a big lead as far as being able to cast larger spells ahead of your opponent. Obelisk of Undoing. 6 mana, return any of your permanents in play to your hand. Can only be used on your own cards. The Battle of Tamakal taught Urza not to rely on fickle reinforcements. Not sure which battle that was. I think Urza probably lost the first battle against Mishra. So then he went back, rethought his strategy, built new troops, and then ended up overpowering Mishra in the end. I don't know why you would want to return. Well, I guess cards that enter the battlefield, you could reuse them, but at 6, the cost 6 mana, that's pretty costly. Even though it only costs 1 to cast. Or if save it from dying, the opponent targets it with a spell, you can bring it back to your hand. Onulet, 3 mana, 2/2. What is it? A construct? It looks like a table. I'm not really sure what it's supposed to be. But it's a 2 mana or 3 mana 2/2. When it dies, its controller gains 2 life. An early inspiration for Urza. Tokasia's Onulets contain magical essences that could be cannibalized after they stopped functioning. Again, this just looks like a walking table. I never used the card. I don't even think I owned the card. But it's decent. 2 life for a creature. 3 mana, 2/2. It's kind of like a basic cost. It's not great, but it's not bad either. Orcish Mechanic. 3 mana, 1/1. Tap them to do 2 damage to any target. Each time you use this ability, you must sacrifice one of your artifacts in play. Another sacrificial artifact card. 2 damage is pretty good, though. Just can't run out of artifacts. Ornithopter. This is another famous flagship card from Magic the Gathering. It being 0 mana cost, so you could cast this for free. 0/2 flying. It had no offense at all by itself. But you could put cards like Unstable Mutation on it, or give it equipment, which won't see equipment won't see play until like years later. You could put enchantments on it though to power them up, +1/+1 counters. Many scholars believe that these creatures were the result of Urza's first attempt at mechanical life, perhaps created in his early days as an apprentice to Tokasia. I think that's how Urza ended up finding the cave. He built the Ornithopter, and he got a bird's eye view of the lay of the land and found the caves of Koilos that way. Excuse me. Still haven't sneezed. Here's another carnival looking card. I think the artist Amy Weber, this was her style. And she definitely liked to put emphasis on the stars in the background. 3 mana, 1/1 gremlins. They do look like gremlins, even from the movie Gremlins, just like all withered. Tap them to tap any artifact. As long as the gremlins remain tapped, that artifact is not untapped as normal during its controller's untap step. You may choose not to untap them during your own untap step. So they lock an artifact down. If it's a creature, that creature won't be able to attack or block. If it's an artifact where you need to tap it to use it, the gremlins would stop it from working. It looks like on the artwork here, they took apart that Mishra's War Machine that I was talking about earlier that I said wasn't a good card. These gremlins made sure it got taken apart. Power Artifact. For 2 blue mana, the activation cost of target artifact is reduced by 2 colorless. If this would reduce the target's artifact activation cost below 1, its artifact activation cost becomes 1 instead. So it doesn't make it free. I can't really think of any artifact I would use it on. A lot of artifacts nowadays don't have like the big casting costs like that. There are a few towers and obelisks that do, but none off the top of my head. Maybe Mindslaver, but even then, once you have enough to cast like these big power cards, you have the mana, you should be able to afford it. Just having the activated cost reduced by 2 doesn't really make a huge impact, in my opinion. Power Leech. Gain 1 life whenever one of your opponent's artifacts becomes tapped, or whenever an activation cost of one of your opponent's artifacts is paid. The Forest of Argoth has developed a resistance to mechanical intrusion. I like the artwork. The leech looks pretty cool. Too bad it's not a creature, though. Priest of Yawgmoth. 2 mana, 1/2. He's making a funny hand sign. Reminds me of Spock or C-3PO. A combination of Spock and C-3PO, even though the Vulcan hand sign is way different than what this guy's doing. Tap to add an amount of black mana equal to the target artifact's casting cost to your mana pool. This effect is played as an interrupt. Target artifact, which must belong to you, is discarded. This artifact cannot be one that is already on its way to the graveyard. I'm going to reread that in the updated rules. Tap it, sacrifice an artifact, add an amount of black mana equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Not a good card. I don't think. There are plenty of better ways to cheat out artifacts or get, like, Dark Ritual in itself was a good way to get 3 black mana. I don't think you'd want to sacrifice one of your high casting cost artifacts just for more mana unless you really, really, really needed it. But I can't think of a reason why you would. Primal Clay. 4 mana, XX. When you cast Primal Clay, you may choose it to be a 1/6 wall, a 3/3 regular creature, or a 2/2 creature with flying. Primal Clay stays the form that you choose unless it is removed from play. So if you returned it to your hand with that one Urza's Obelisk card or whatever it was called, and you needed the flying aspect or the blocking aspect of the wall, you could do that. But once your choice was made, it had to stay on the battlefield for as long as it stayed on the battlefield. I did have this card, but I never it never did anything good, I should say. Its versatility is not powerful enough. Racolite. I've never seen this card. 6 mana. Pay 2 and tap it. Prevent 1 damage to any target. If Racolite is used, it returns to its owner's hand at end of turn. All enchantments on Racolite are then discarded. Urza was the first to understand that the war would not be lost for lack of power, but for lack of troops. I'm going to reread that because it kind of confused me. Pay 2. Prevent the next 1 damage that we've dealt to any target this turn. Return Racolite to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next turn. That's very costly just for I mean, for as much 2 mana as you had to prevent the damage, but then it goes back to your hand and you have to recast it for 6. Don't think that's good. Reconstruction. I did have this card. It's missing the symbol. It's missing the Antiquities symbol on here. I just noticed that. For 1 blue, you can bring an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Tedious research made the sages of the College of Lotnam adept in repairing broken artifacts. I used this card in my Mindslaver deck. Mindslaver was a card made in Mirrodin where it cost 7 and you paid 7 and you tapped it to gain control of target player's next turn. You pretty much got to play whatever cards your opponent had for them. You got to choose. You got to take over the opponent's turn, so to speak. And then after Mindslaver was used, you'd sacrifice it and it would go to the graveyard. So I would just bring it back with Reconstruction to my hand, recast it, and then repeat. I would take control of their next turn. So I had like 4 Mindslavers and 4 Reconstructions. It only worked like half the time because it was very mana heavy to do. I had ways to cheat out the Mindslaver with Tinker. We would later revisit this whole Brothers War in the Urza Saga block. And it itself had a lot of very powerful cards that went very well with this set. And Reconstruction is really good for just 1 blue mana if you're using artifacts. Reverse Polarity. This is like comic book art. Justin Hampton. That's funny. 2 white mana. All damage done to you so far this turn by artifacts is instead added to your life total instead. You gain X life where X is twice the damage dealt to you so far this turn by artifacts. I've never seen this card so I don't think anyone's ever used it as far as I know, but that does not make it impossible. I'm sure people who played Magic back in the days of Antiquity, if they're anyone in their play group used a lot of artifacts, they would use Reverse Polarity if they were running white. Rocket Launcher. The artwork for this card is awesome. Not only does the rocket launcher itself look good, the orc or goblin using it, he's enjoying himself. He has a Rambo headband. The fire blast explosion coming from the card and the salvo that's spitting out here. This card is awesome just by the artwork alone. 4 mana, you pay 2, do 1 damage to any target. Rocket launcher may not be used until it begins a turn and play on your side. If it is used, rocket launcher is destroyed at end of turn. So you cannot use rocket launcher the turn it comes into play. You have to wait a full turn to use it. What these devices lacked in subtlety, they made up in strength. So you had to make sure you had a bunch of mana because you only got like that turn to use it. So the card itself isn't too good outright. You have to wait a whole turn to use it. It costs 4 mana. And then the turn that you do use it, you have to make sure you pump in as much mana as you can to get the most damage possible. Because even if you just use it once, you have to sacrifice it at the end of your turn. So it would make sense to just dump all your mana into it and just blow up, deal 1 damage to any target, whether you're shooting your opponent or shooting down one of their creatures or multiple creatures. If you had access to infinite mana, then you could win the game just by doing infinite damage to your opponent. At that point, the whole sacrificing it at the end of the turn didn't really matter. There are so many ways to get infinite mana in Magic now. But I never knew this card existed. There would be different variations of the card. I think Goblin Cannon might be one of them, but it only targets creatures, if I remember correctly. That's another reason I'm going through and looking at all these old sets. It'll re-jog my memory. Sage of Lotnam. Man, he has definitely got a beard. I don't know how he doesn't trip when he walks around the house. Unless he can animate the beard via telekinesis. 1/2. Tap to draw a card. Each time you use this ability, you must choose one of your artifacts in play and sacrifice it. So another sacrifice artifact, draw a card. Shapeshifter. I did have this card. Pay 6 mana. The X's below represent any number from 0 to 6. You choose X when Shapeshifter is cast, and you may change it during your upkeep. So its toughness is 7 minus whatever number you choose from 0 to 6. So if you choose 6, Shapeshifter becomes a 6/1. So the higher number you choose for its attack power, the less its toughness will be. But the fact that you could change it at the beginning of each turn makes it a little more versatile. I think it's better than Primal Clay. It does cost 2 mana more, but you're able to change it as you need it at the beginning of each of your turns. And 6 mana for a 6/1 isn't bad if your opponent doesn't have any creatures out. If your opponent does have creatures and you need a blocker, then you can choose 0 and you have a nice 0/7 wall, so to speak. Born like a phoenix from the flame, but neither bulk nor shape the same. Jonathan Swift from Van Brug's house. Not familiar with that. I don't know if it's real work. Shatterstorm. This card would be reprinted multiple times. I assume this is wine or maybe a sacrificial goblet. Whatever the case, 4 mana, destroy all artifacts in play. They cannot be regenerated. Chains of leaping fire and sizzling lightning laid waste the artificer's handiwork, sparing not a single device. Staff of Zegon. This guy's got a mohawk. The Zegon staff looks cool. I've never heard of this card. Pay 4, pay 3. Target creature gets -2 power until end of turn. Creatures with power less than 1 deal no damage. Though Mishra was impressed by the staves Ashnod had created for Zegon's defenses, he understood they only hinted at her full potential. I guess staves is the plural form of staff. I did not know that, but my head says it's right. My brain says it's right. Definitely not a good card. It costs way too much to do what it does. It costs 4 to put out. You pay 3 to use it just to give a creature -2 attack. If it was -3, then I say that'd be okay, but the fact that the reduction is less than the cost itself, I don't think it's worth it. Strip Mine, one of the most infamous lands in Magic today. You can tap it to add a colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can sacrifice Strip Mine to destroy any land on the battlefield. Unlike previous conflicts, the war between Urza and Mishra made Dominaria itself a casualty of war. And there would be a card later on in Magic's future called Crucible of Worlds. It's an artifact and it only costs 3 mana, and Crucible of Worlds lets you play lands from your graveyard. So by sacrificing Strip Mine to destroy one of your opponent's lands, your Strip Mine goes to the graveyard. You can, on your next turn, if you already played a land, or if you didn't already play a land, you can replay Strip Mine and destroy another one of their lands. And each turn, you could just keep playing Strip Mine from your graveyard and destroy your opponent's lands one after another. The fact also, because it's a land, it cannot be countered. There was no way to really stop Strip Mine from happening, except for those cards from Alpha Consecrate Land that say your land cannot be targeted. But I don't think anybody usually plays with those cards because there are not, other than land destruction, they don't really make cards anymore that really mess with your opponent's land. We see them every now and then. They can either change it or add a basic land type to it. But Strip Mine definitely is a powerful card from Magic's past that still sees play today. I did not know Strip Mine had an alternate artwork. This is the right side, and that's a more panned out form. You can see these flatted foothills from... This is where everything was dug up and the land was destroyed. Oh, does it have 4 artwork? I have never seen these before. Is this a sandcastle or a little mining tower? I'm not sure based on the dimensions of... I'm not sure if it zoomed out or what. And the 4th version. That's cool. I did not know it had 4 different versions of art. Suchi, 4 mana, 4/4. If Suchi goes to the graveyard, its controller gets 4 colorless mana. I don't know what Suchi's supposed to be. This looks like a snake thing. What is it, a construct? Yeah. Flawed copies of relics from the Thrawn Empire, the Suchi were inherently unstable but provided useful knowledge for Tokasia's students. Not sure what their body looks like. If they were like humanoid. I assume they were, since they were artifact creatures. Tablet of Epiter. 1 mana. I've never seen this card before. Pay 1 tablet, you gain 1 life every time one of your artifacts goes to the graveyard. You can only gain 1 life per artifact in this way. Originally considered the work of Urza, this tablet was created by forgers seeking to imitate Urza's masterpieces. Not really that great. Tawnos' Coffin. I think Tawnos was Urza's... Yeah, Tawnos was Urza's apprentice. Pay 4 mana. Pay 3, tap it, select a creature in play. That creature is exiled as long as the coffin remains tapped. All counters and enchantments on the creature are also exiled. If the coffin is untapped or removed, the creature returns to the battlefield. You may choose not to untap the coffin. So I guess if you're looking to blow up the battlefield by destroying all creatures, you can save one of your creatures from dying by putting it in the coffin, and then after using the Wrath of God and the battlefield is clear, you can untap your coffin and the creature comes back to the battlefield. And it doesn't lose any enchantments or counters on it. Tawnos' Wand. 4 mana, you could pay 2, make your creature with power no greater than 2 unblockable except by other artifact creatures until end of turn. Other cards may be used to increase the target's power beyond 2 after blockers have been chosen. So one weird thing is, and I don't know if they just didn't have any idea, but all the characters that the storylines are based off of, like Urza, Mishra, Tawnos, Tokasia, Ashnod, they didn't get cards of themselves until very, very later on in Magic. Almost 20 years, probably 20 years after they were first mentioned in the set. For whatever reason, they just didn't. I think it's because since they are such not heavy characters, important characters, integral to the plot, and they did not have legendary creatures yet. Legendary creatures would come in Legends, which I think is the next set after Antiquities. But even then, they did not make a lot of them until much later. We will talk more over Legends on the Legends stream. Tawnos' Weaponry. 2 mana. You can pay 2. Target creature gets +1/+1 as long as Tawnos' Weaponry remains tapped. You may choose not to untap it during your untap step. When Urza's War Machines became too costly, Tawnos' Weaponry replaced them. Tetravis. I like the artwork on the card. It looks cool. This looks like it reminds me of a transformer or like 3 different robots that connect into one. This looks like a headless sea turtle though. So does this. These look like parts of a turtle, and then this looks like a stingray's tail. 1/1 flying. It enters the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters, so then it would be a 4/4 flying. During your upkeep, you may remove a counter on or off Tetravis. Whenever a counter is removed, create a 1/1 flying artifact creature. If such a creature dies, the counter is removed from play. Such creatures may not have enchantments cast on them, and they do not share any enchantments on Tetravis. Oh, you cannot add any counters on them. Apparently, it got It enters the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may remove any number of +1/+1 counters. If you do, create that many 1/1 colorless Tetravite tokens. They each have flying, and they cannot be enchanted. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile any number of tokens created with Tetravis. If you do, put that many counters on Tetravis. Okay, it does the same thing. It's just reworded better. The Rack. Instead of Cursed Rack, this is just the regular Rack. He got split down his unmentionables. Pay 1. If the opponent has fewer than 3 cards in their hand, they take 1 damage for each card less than 3. So it's the opposite of Black Vice. Invented in Mishra's earlier days, the Rack was once his most feared creation. Titania's Song. 4 mana, all non-creature artifacts in play lose their abilities and become artifact creatures with power and toughness equal to their casting cost. If Titania's Song leaves the battlefield, all artifacts return to normal before the next untap step. Titania, I think, was the goddess of the forest of Argoth before it was destroyed. Transmute Artifact. 2 blue, search your library for any artifact and put it onto the battlefield. Choose any artifact in play that you control and sacrifice it. If the new artifact has a casting cost greater than the sacrificed, you must pay mana equal to the difference, or Transmute Artifact is countered and both artifacts go to the graveyard. So there was a way to cheat out artifacts. Depending on the mana cost of what you sacrificed and what you bring out. If you could afford the cost, then you could easily do that. But, for example, if you're going to sacrifice a 0 mana Ornithopter to bring out the Colossus of Sardia, you're going to have to pay 9 mana. And if you can't afford that, then you just wasted the spell and lost your Ornithopter and the Colossus itself. I know in Urza's Legacy, which that set would come years later, they would make a card called Tinker. It's a way I would get Mindslaver out. All it was, it cost 3, and you just sacrificed an artifact to search your deck for any other artifact to put it onto the battlefield. Definitely a very powerful card. I'm not sure which artifact is changing into which. This just might be 2 random things of art. This might be the Urza's Obelisk card, but I'm not sure what this is. Triskelion. 6 mana, 1/1, and enters the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters. You may remove a +1/+1 counter from it at any time to do 1 damage to any target. A brainchild of Tawnos, the Triskelion proved its versatility and usefulness in many of the later battles between the brothers. This was one of Urza's war weapons, so to speak. Triskelion would get reprinted a few times with different artwork. And I have to say, each artwork looks vastly different from its predecessor. This one looks like a tin can junkyard robot. But others look like metallic spiders or walking jellyfish, mechanical jellyfish. This one looks very different from the rest. But this is the original Triskelion. 6 mana is a lot for a 4/4, but the fact that at any time you could essentially deal 3 damage divided as you choose is decent. If you use a deck that puts +1/+1 counters on creatures, you could essentially give it +1/+1 counters and then dish out the damage. There is a, I want to say it's an infinite combo with Triskelion. I forgot what the name of the enchantment is, but it's every time this creature takes damage, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then you would put 2, and you would remove a counter to deal damage to itself. Then it would get 2 counters. Oh, doubling season, I think. You need a doubling season out to double the amount of counters that come on it. And then each time the creature takes damage, it gets that many +1/+1 counters. So you'd remove a counter, add 2 to it. Remove one of those, add 2 to it. And then you could do infinite damage that way. And the last page before we wrap it up. Urza's Avenger. I like how the artwork style is like Urza's Blueprints page. Gives me Leonardo da Vinci vibes. Urza's Avenger kind of looks weird though. It looks like a droid with mechanical bones. But I think the mechanical bones are there just for as like a diaphragm of how he wanted his soldiers to look like. For 6 mana, 4/4, for free, he gets -1/-1 until end of turn and gains your choice of flying, banding, first strike, or trample until end of turn. Unable to settle on just one design, Urza decided to create one versatile being. You can give him all 3, but then if you do, he'll just be a 1/1. Banding is useless, I think. It's just that ability is retired. But first strike and trample, so he would end up being a 2/2 with first strike and trample if you did that. Not worth it in my opinion. Urza's Chalice. Cheers. You can pay 1, tap it. Any artifact cast by any player, you gain 1 life. You can only gain 1 life each time an artifact is cast. It's the opposite of when the artifact is destroyed by gaining a life. When sorely wounded or tired, Urza would often retreat to the workshops of his apprentices. They were greatly amazed at how much better he looked each time he took a sip of water. Urza's Chalice definitely had healing properties. And thanks to the Might Stone, it granted him like almost near immortality. Urza's Mine. Eventually, this group of lands that I'm about to talk about would become known as Urzatron, because these 3 lands, if you had them all in play, they would produce a lot of mana for you, as I will explain. And these lands also had multiple versions of art. Starting with the Mine, you just tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. If you have the Tower, Power Plant, and Mine in play, it adds for 2 colorless mana instead of just 1. Mines became common as cities during the days of the Artificers. There's another mine. There's a weird Yoda-looking goblin. Like, it's like somebody took a photograph and he wasn't prepared for the photo. I had this one. This was what the Urza's Mine that I owned. I like this little subterranean cave machine, mining machine. Does not look safe because this is a flow of lava, so you definitely want to travel in one of these to be able to pick whatever rocks or diamonds you needed. Never seen this card. I mean, I've seen the card, I've just never seen this artwork. Weird looking, like, are they mining stacks of books? Pancakes? Alright, that's it from the mine. Oh, we're going to take a break from the lands because next is Urza's Mitre. I guess they made him the Pope. Did not know this card existed. It even has the scarf that comes with it. For 3 mana, you pay 3, tap it, draw a card from your library every time an artifact goes to the graveyard. You can only draw 1 card per artifact destroyed in this way. You cannot use this when you sacrifice an artifact you cannot use this. You cannot draw a card from this if you sacrificed an artifact to pay the cost of another card. So your opponent pretty much has to destroy it in order for you to draw a card. I did not know that card existed. Back to the land, Urza's Power Plant. By itself, taps for a colorless. If you have the tower and mine in play, it taps for 2 instead. Artifact construction required immense resources. This looks cool. I could just feel the steam just coming out from this power plant. These are all power stones inside powering Urza's factories. Here's another power plant. I had this one. I guess these are columns of Thrawn power stones. I also had this one too. I guess this is a metallic wasp, and they're harnessing its energy from its abdomen. And this is a power stone being boiled. Next, Urza's Tower. This one has the autumn artwork. So by itself, it taps for 1. If you have the mine, tower, and power plant in play, it taps for 3 instead. Urza always put Takesia's lessons on resource gathering to effective use. This is the summer tower because it is very... This one takes place in a tropical island, it looks like, where this one was in a forest in autumn. This one's on plains, I assume springtime maybe, if the season, or it's just by location instead of season. Very pristine looking tower. And this one is up in the snow-capped mountains. I never did collect all the artworks for it, but if I were still collecting paper magic, then I definitely would seek out each artwork for the Urza lands. I think they're pretty cool. Like I said, Urzatron would end up becoming a very popular dex to use to cheat out, not cheat out, but speed out artifacts. And then eventually we have the Eldrazi, which will be mentioned much, much later on in Magic's future. Wall of Spears, 3 mana, 2/3 wall with first strike. Couldn't attack, but a wall with first strike. 3 mana, 2/3. Nowadays it sucks, but back then I used this card if I needed just something to block with. Even the most conservative generals revised their tactics after the Battle of Sarinth, during which a handful of peasant pikemen held off a trio of rampaging crawworms. Crawworms were the big green worm from Alpha and Beta. I like the artwork on Wall of Spears, though. Skeletons were always cool. You can thank Army of Darkness for that. Oh, here's the Weak Stone. So it was the Might Stone and the Weak Stone, not the Meek Stone I was talking about. I don't know if this was supposed to be like a werewolf that turned into a chihuahua or what, but all attacking creatures get -1 attack. Creatures with power less than 1 deal no damage. During the brothers' childhood, Tokasia took them to explore the sacred cave of Koilos. There, in the Hall of Tag Sin, Mishra discovered the mysterious Weak Stone. Zenic Poltergeist. This looks like Merlin from Sword in the Stone. 1/1. Tap to turn a target non-creature artifact into an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its casting cost. This transformation lasts until your next upkeep. After that, the target regains all its original abilities. Yawgmoth Demon. I had this card. 6 mana, 6/6 flying first strike. That's already really, really good for today's standards. During your upkeep, you must sacrifice an artifact. If you don't, the Yawgmoth Demon becomes tapped and does 2 damage to you. So the cost to keep the demon out, as long as you prepare for it, then you should be able to comfortably sacrifice some of your artifacts in order to keep this demon out. It was very hard to kill this demon back in the day with combat, with it having first strike. A lot of creatures couldn't block it because it had flying. The artwork was cool. I thought that this was Yawgmoth himself, but Yawgmoth would not get a card until much later, just like with Urza and Mishra and the rest of the characters that were evolved in the Brothers were. Yoshin Soldier. 3 mana, 1/4. Attacking does not cause the Yoshin Soldier to tap. That would eventually be known as the keyword Vigilance. After Krug was destroyed, while most of its defenders were at its side, Urza vowed that none of his allies would ever again need to fear for their own defense, even while laying siege to a city far from their homes. These would be Urza's foot soldiers, so to speak. They were used back in the Thrawn with and like I said, they were Urza's foot soldier. I believe that is the last card. So the favorite card of the set goes to, let me scroll back up. Gaia's Avenger, I believe I said. Yep, Gaia's Avengers. Why can't I scroll all the way? Scroll higher. I'm just moving too fast, that's why. Previous. He's here somewhere. I could have just typed his name in, but I thought it was going to be Dragon Engine, but Gaia's Avenger proved me wrong. And I never even owned the card. So from this, we had from the Alpha Beta set, I said the Thicket Basilisk was my favorite. Arabian Nights was the Junam Ifrit. And Gaia's Avenger is my favorite Antiquities card. I might own it. I think, now that I think about it, I think I saw him at my local card shop before, and I snagged one. But it's been forever since I looked through my physical collection. After my local card shop closed, finding another shop that had the same atmosphere was really hard to do. And then my work schedule changed, and then I bought a house, so I had to take a break from buying cards. And then COVID happened, which stopped a lot of businesses from doing social things. And then I just got complacent with digital Magic. That scratched my Magic itch. And a lot of my friends who played also don't play anymore. So that is where I am with Magic now. I just play Arena. I played a couple times at work on my lunch break with my friends and coworkers who did play, but we're not on the same schedule anymore, so we couldn't do that. Well, that wraps it up for the Magic Antiquities set. I do believe Legends is next. We can double check that by looking on Scryfall at all sets. Legends is next. I'm not gonna revised because it is white bordered versions of cards from Antiquities, cards from Arabian Nights, and cards from Alpha and Beta. Cards we've already reviewed already. There are going to be a lot of these reprinted sets that I'm going to skip over because there are no brand new cards in them. So next week we will be talking about Legends. Thanks for watching. If you have a favorite card from the Antiquities set, feel free to let me know. I'll be using scryfall.com to look at these cards. It gave me the best visual library of them. And again, anything you want to add, if you played Antiquities or any of the cards that we talked about today, bring back any memories, or you had deck strategies for them, feel free to let me know in the comments. And that's Panther saying goodbye. Good night, everybody.